Margaret broke my heart before she broke federal law. You don't mess with a man's family legacy and expect mercy in return. She stood there in my driveway that morning, designer heels clicking on gravel that had been here since before her subdivision was even a dream, waving a $2,500 for hunting on land my grandfather built in 1952. The woman had the audacity to tell me my 70-year family tradition was incompatible with modern community standards, while her fake HOA had been stealing from neighbors for 4 years straight. What Margaret didn't know, what none of these suburban tyrants ever know, is that some of us actually read the fine print, and her perfectly manicured empire was built on a foundation of lies that wouldn't survive a basic legal challenge. By the time I was done with her, Margaret Whitmore would learn the difference between real authority and the kind of power you get from terrorizing families with clipboards and fake smiles. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because you're about to see what happens when a California real estate scammer picks a fight with 3 generations of Colorado stubborn. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm what you might call Colorado bred and born, 3rd-generation rancher, though these days I make my living operating heavy equipment for the county. Not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps my hands honest. The land, all 40 acres of it, came to me when Grandpa passed 2 years ago. 40 acres of pure Colorado heaven, complete with that old hunting cabin, a weathered barn that's seen better decades, and pasture land that rolls like green waves toward the mountains. The cabin itself is nothing fancy, just weathered pine logs and a stone chimney that's probably held together more by stubbornness than mortar at this point. But here's the thing about that cabin. It's got history. The walls are covered with faded photos of 3 generations of Morrison men posing with their deer. Grandpa in his Army surplus jacket, my dad in his 70s sideburns, and me as a skinny teenager holding up my first buck. The whistle of wind through the old gaps in the logs sounds like voices from the past, and I swear the place still smells like the pipe tobacco Grandpa used to smoke on cold November mornings. My son Tyler, he's 16 now, comes out every other weekend. Kid's got more tech savvy in his pinky finger than I've got in my whole body, but put a rifle in his hands and he's all Morrison. Divorce wasn't easy on either of us, but this land, this is where we connect, where we remember who we are. Now, Meadowbrook Estates, that's the subdivision that sprouted up around my property like mushrooms after rain. Built in 2018, 47 cookie-cutter houses ranging from $450,000, 0 cents, to $650,000, 0 cents. Most of the neighbors are decent enough folks. They work downtown, keep their lawns mowed, wave when they see you. Live and let live, you know? But then there's Margaret Whitmore. Margaret moved here from California about 6 years ago, bought the biggest house in the development, one of those modern monstrosities that looks like someone took a cardboard box and painted it beige. She's 52, works in real estate, and has been the HOA board president for 8 years running, always wearing those quilted vests that scream, "I shop at stores with names like Countryside Manor," and her manicured nails are constantly tapping on clipboards like she's conducting some invisible orchestra of neighborhood compliance. Her thing? Elevating property values and modernizing the community. Translation? Making everything look like a magazine spread, even if it means steamrolling over anything with actual character. I should have seen the writing on the wall when she showed up for her welcome to the neighborhood visit 3 months after I inherited the place. She stood in my driveway, her overwhelming perfume clashing with the honest scent of hay and motor oil from my workshop, surveying my property like a general planning a siege. "That cabin is really bringing down everyone's property values," she said, not even bothering with small talk. "Ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice level, "my cabin was here before your subdivision was even a twinkle in some developer's eye." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Well, we'll see about that. The HOA has certain standards to maintain." She paused, letting that hang in the air like smoke from a backfire. "I'm sure a reasonable man like yourself understands the importance of community harmony." Community harmony, right? What she meant was conformity. What she meant was control. As I watched her click-clack her way back down my gravel drive in those ridiculous heels, I had no idea she was already planning her first move. Had no idea that in her mind, my 40 acres weren't a family legacy. They were just another piece of property to be managed, controlled, and ultimately acquired. But I was about to learn real quick that Margaret Whitmore didn't just want to elevate property values. She wanted to own them. Margaret's opening shot came 2 weeks later, delivered with all the ceremony of a declaration of war. Official HOA letterhead, legal-sized envelope, the works. I opened it standing next to my mailbox, and I swear I could hear her smug satisfaction crackling off the paper like static electricity. "Dear Mr. Morrison," it began, "after careful review, the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association has determined that the structure commonly referred to as your hunting cabin constitutes a non-conforming architectural violation under Section 4.7 of our community covenants. Non-conforming architectural violation, $20 words for we don't like your cabin." The letter went on to demand removal of the cabin within 30 days, with fines of $100, 0 cents per day starting immediately. At the bottom, Margaret's signature swooped across the page like a buzzard circling roadkill. The kicker? A little footnote that read, "All properties within Meadowbrook Estates must maintain aesthetic harmony consistent with modern residential standards." I'll admit it, I saw red for about 30 seconds. Then I did what Grandpa always taught me. When someone's trying to buffalo you, you better know the lay of the land. So that Saturday, Tyler and I made a trip to the county courthouse. Nothing like the squeak of microfiche machines and the rustle of old property records to clear your head. Tyler, bless him, actually found it fascinating. "Dad," he said, adjusting his glasses as he scrolled through decades-old survey maps, "this is like being a detective but for real estate." What we found was gold. Pure, legal gold. My property had never, and I mean never, been included in the HOA's jurisdiction. The original boundary surveys showed clear as day that Grandpa's land was specifically excluded from the development agreement. But here's where it got interesting. There was a notation from 2019 about a boundary adjustment proposal that had been voted on at an HOA meeting. That's when I paid a visit to Mrs. Patterson, the sweet elderly lady who lived in the original house at the corner of Meadow and Pine. She'd been there since the first houses went up, and she had the memory of an elephant and the filing system to match. "Oh, honey," she said, pouring me coffee that could have stripped paint, "Margaret pushed that boundary change through when half the neighborhood was on summer vacation. Said it was just a technical correction to include properties that had been accidentally overlooked." She made air quotes with her arthritis-gnarled fingers. "Most folks didn't even know what they were voting on." Armed with this information, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. Tyler came with me, phone in hand, because, he said, and I quote, "Dad, if this lady's as crazy as she sounds, someone needs to record it." The meeting was held in Margaret's living room, which should have been my first clue. Picture 20 people crammed into a space designed for intimate dinner parties, all sitting on those uncomfortable metal folding chairs that screech every time you move. Margaret presided from her throne, like some suburban queen holding court. When it came time for new business, I stood up and politely asked to address the boundary issue. I spread out the original survey maps on our coffee table, the papers crinkling against the glass surface. "These documents clearly show that my property was never included in the HOA jurisdiction," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "I'd like to know what legal authority you're claiming over pre-existing properties." Margaret's response was pure dismissive arrogance. "Mr. Morrison, those old documents are irrelevant. We have updated community standards that apply to everyone in our neighborhood." She waved her hand like she was shooing away a mosquito. "I'm sure you understand that we can't have exceptions just because someone claims their property is special." That's when I made my mistake. I should have just smiled and walked away. Instead, I pressed the issue. "Show me the legal document that gives you authority over my land." Margaret's fake smile slipped for just a second, and I caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating underneath. "Mr. Morrison, I think you'll find that we're prepared to pursue all legal remedies to maintain our community standards." The room went dead quiet. Even Tyler looked up from his phone, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a promise," she replied, that smile sliding back into place like a mask. That's when she dropped her first real bombshell. She'd already filed complaints with county code enforcement, claiming my hunting activities created noise pollution and safety hazards. She produced a petition, supposedly signed by concerned neighbors, though I recognized only 5 signatures out of 47 possible houses. Her ultimatum was crystal clear: cease all hunting activities immediately or face escalating enforcement action. As I walked out of that meeting, Tyler filming Margaret's smug expression as we left, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about power. And Margaret Whitmore had just made the mistake of trying to use hers against the wrong man. Margaret didn't waste time following through on her threats. Within a week, I had county code enforcement knocking on my door, clipboards in hand and frowns on their faces. Turns out Margaret had some connections at City Hall. Her real estate firm had apparently helped a few bureaucrats find their dream homes at suspiciously good prices. The violations they cited were creative, I'll give them that. Septic system concerns for the cabin that had been operating just fine for 70 years. Unsafe hunting practices, despite the fact that I'd never had so much as a warning from state wildlife officials. Anonymous complaints about noise disturbances at exactly the times I happened to be out hunting. But Margaret's real masterstroke, a neighborhood flyer campaign that would have made any propaganda minister proud. Every mailbox in Meadowbrook Estates got treated to a glossy handout titled Protecting Our Property Values, the Hidden Costs of Non-Conforming Land Use, complete with stock photos of suburban families looking concerned and bullet points about how incompatible activities could cost homeowners thousands in equity loss. Then came the sabotage. I walked out to my truck the morning of opening day to find all 4 tires slashed. Clean cuts, professional job. Had to be someone with the right tools and the stomach for vandalism. While I was calling AAA, Tyler discovered something even more infuriating. Brand new no hunting signs posted along my property line, complete with official-looking citations about municipal ordinances. The crack of my boots on the frosty ground as I yanked those signs out of my dirt sounded like gunshots in the morning air. Each metal stake came up with a satisfying clang, and I stacked them in my truck bed like evidence for a crime that hadn't been committed yet. When I confronted Margaret about it, caught her in her driveway as she was loading grocery bags into her pristine white SUV, she gave me that innocent act worthy of an Oscar nomination. "I wouldn't know anything about that, Mr. Morrison," she said, not even bothering to look up from her organic kale and artisanal cheese selection. "Perhaps someone in the community is just trying to prevent accidents." Right. Someone in the community with access to professional-grade signage and a working knowledge of where to place them for maximum impact. That's when Tyler's Generation Z detective skills really started paying off. Kid had installed security cameras around the property after the tire incident. Nothing fancy, just some trail cams repositioned to cover the house and barn. What we captured was pure gold. Clear footage of Margaret's landscaping crew placing those no hunting signs at 2:17 IEM on a Tuesday night. Tyler enhanced the footage on his laptop, adding timestamps and zooming in on license plates. "Dad," he said, grinning like he'd just solved the Kennedy assassination, "we've got her dead to rights." But Margaret was smarter than I gave her credit for. When I brought the evidence to the county sheriff, she had already filed a complaint claiming someone was harassing her landscaping crew and trespassing to install surveillance equipment. Her version of events painted me as an unstable neighbor, escalating a simple property dispute into something dangerous. Meanwhile, my lawyer bills were starting to mount, $15,000 and climbing, just to defend my right to exist on my own land. Margaret's calculation was simple. She could outspend me into submission. The HOA's legal fund versus my personal checking account, no contest. That's when I decided to get my own survey done. Professional grade, court admissible, the works. Cost me another $3,000 I didn't really have, but what the surveyor found made it worth every penny. Margaret's perfectly manicured fence, the one that surrounded her award-winning garden, encroached 15 feet onto my property. A quarter acre of my grandfather's land was being used to grow her prize-winning roses and that ridiculous topiary maze she was so proud of. I stood there in the morning light, my calloused hands gripping the new survey stakes, and couldn't help but smile. Margaret had been so focused on attacking my cabin that she'd forgotten about her own vulnerabilities. When I filed the formal trespassing complaint, demanding immediate fence removal, Margaret's panic was almost palpable. Her expensive landscaping, the kind featured in Better Homes and Gardens, would be destroyed. Her garden paradise would become a construction zone. That's when she made her first real mistake. She offered to buy the problematic land at below market rates. $50,000 for what any appraiser would value at twice that amount. "Think about it," she said during our impromptu negotiation on the sidewalk between our properties. "You could take this money, relocate somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle. The smell of her desperation was almost as strong as that cloying perfume she bathed in. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Margaret, my lifestyle was here long before you showed up, and it'll be here long after you're gone." That's when she went nuclear. Margaret's nuclear option arrived in the form of a lawsuit thick enough to stop a bullet. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, filed by some hotshot attorney from Denver who specialized in HOA disputes. The claim? My hunting activities were causing Margaret and her supporters to suffer severe psychological trauma and fear for their children's safety. I'm not kidding. According to the lawsuit, the sound of gunfire during legal hunting hours was apparently equivalent to living in a war zone. Never mind that hunting season lasted exactly 2 weeks, or that I'd never fired a shot anywhere near residential areas. In Margaret's version of reality, I was some kind of backwoods lunatic, terrorizing suburbanites with my dangerous lifestyle. She was also seeking a restraining order to prevent any hunting activities on my property. If granted, it would effectively shut down a 70-year family tradition with the stroke of a judge's pen. The local news picked up the story. Hunter, when suburban living meets rural traditions. Channel 7 ran a segment that made me look like some relic from the past, refusing to adapt to modern times. Margaret naturally gave a quote that would have made any politician proud. "We're just trying to protect our children from dangerous activities that have no place in a modern residential community." But here's where Margaret's overconfidence started working against her. The lawsuit required her to document every instance of alleged harassment, and Tyler, bless his methodical teenage heart, started cross-referencing her claims with our security footage and hunting logs. What we found was a pattern that would make any prosecutor smile. Margaret had been calling the police during my legal hunting sessions, reporting shots fired toward residential area when I was clearly hunting in the opposite direction. She'd filed noise complaints at times when I wasn't even on the property. She'd even claimed I was threatening behavior during encounters that Tyler had filmed, showing me being nothing but polite and professional. The court hearings became a 3-ring circus. Margaret showed up with a small army of supporters, the same 5 people who'd signed her original petition, plus a few newcomers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I came with Tyler, Mrs. Patterson, and a growing group of neighbors who were starting to see through Margaret's act. During one particularly memorable session, Margaret's attorney produced a binder full of evidence, photographs of my property taken from her upstairs window, complete with telephoto lens shots of me cleaning my rifle on my own back porch. The invasive nature of her surveillance was starting to creep out even her own supporters. That's when the dirty tricks really ramped up. Anonymous reports to state wildlife officials claiming I was baiting deer illegally, fake social media accounts spreading rumors about my unstable behavior and threats against neighbors. Margaret's real estate connections started making subtle suggestions to other property owners that their values would suffer if they didn't support the HOA's position. The smell of burned documents from Margaret's backyard fire pit became a regular evening occurrence. Tyler spotted it first, pointing out the acrid smoke that was definitely not coming from autumn leaves. Someone was destroying evidence, and we all knew who. Meanwhile, my stress levels were affecting everything. Tyler started asking if he could stay with his mom more often because things were getting weird. Work became my only escape from the constant legal pressure, but even there I couldn't focus properly. Sleep became elusive when you're wondering what fresh hell tomorrow's mail might bring. The community was splitting down the middle. Some neighbors were genuinely scared by Margaret's fear-mongering campaign. Others were getting tired of her authoritarian approach to everything from lawn height to holiday decorations. Mrs. Patterson became my unofficial intelligence network, keeping track of which way the wind was blowing in neighborhood opinion. But Tyler's school project was turning into something bigger than either of us expected. What started as a report on local government had become a comprehensive investigation into HOA overreach. His research uncovered a pattern that went beyond just my situation. Margaret had been pressuring other homeowners too. The Millers were being cited for their non-conforming garden shed. The Johnsons got violation notices for parking their work truck in their own driveway. Dave Martinez was facing fines for his kid's basketball hoop. Margaret's vision of community standards apparently meant eliminating anything that suggested real people lived in these houses. That's when Tyler made the discovery that changed everything. While researching Margaret's background for his project, he found newspaper articles from her previous neighborhood in California. Same pattern, same tactics, same results. She'd systematically pressured homeowners to sell, then somehow those properties always ended up being flipped by her real estate associates at massive profits. "Dad," Tyler said, showing me the articles on his laptop screen, "she's not trying to improve the neighborhood, she's trying to own it." Any twist, Margaret wasn't just after compliance, she was after acquisition, and my 40 acres weren't just a nuisance to her vision, they were the centerpiece of a much bigger plan. The breakthrough came at 2:17 IEM on a Tuesday night, courtesy of Tyler's insomnia and his obsession with legal databases. I found him in the kitchen, laptop open, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and printed documents that looked like they belonged in a law office. "Dad," he said, his voice crackling with excitement and exhaustion, "you need to see this." What he'd discovered was a bombshell that would make Margaret's entire house of cards come tumbling down. The HOA, Margaret's precious tool of neighborhood control, had never been properly incorporated under state law. Not even close. Tyler had spent hours comparing the required state filing documents with what Margaret had actually submitted. The smoking gun was right there in black and white, missing signatures on the county registration. No proper articles of incorporation, no state certification. According to Colorado law, an improperly formed HOA has zero legal authority to levy fines, enforce covenants, or basically do anything Margaret had been doing for 4 years. Knowledge nugget. Every legitimate HOA must file articles of incorporation with the state. No exceptions, no shortcuts. If those documents aren't properly filed and certified, the organization has no more legal authority than your neighborhood book club. The implications hit me like a freight train. Margaret had been collecting dues from 47 families for 4 years without any legal right to do so. We're talking about over $200,000, 0 cents in collected fees, with no proper accounting, no oversight, and no legitimate authority. The printer hummed in the late-night silence as we copied every piece of evidence, the papers rustling like whispered secrets in the kitchen light. Tyler had become a forensic accountant overnight, tracking money flows and discovering discrepancies that would make any auditor's eyes light up. But the real revelation came when Mrs. Patterson stopped by the next morning with a manila envelope she'd been saving for the right moment. Inside were documents that painted an even more damning picture. Margaret's real estate firm had been secretly representing the developers of a proposed shopping center on the other side of the county. "She came to see me 3 months ago," Mrs. Patterson explained, her shaking hands holding a cup of coffee I'd poured strong enough to wake the dead. "Wanted to know if I'd be interested in selling, said property values were going to change dramatically in the near future." The pieces were falling into place like dominoes in an earthquake. Tyler's research had uncovered the real prize. My grandfather's property included valuable gravel deposits and, here's the kicker, water rights that were worth more than the land itself in drought-prone Colorado. Margaret wasn't just trying to eliminate a hunting cabin, she was positioning herself to acquire the most valuable, undeveloped land in the area, then flip it to developers for millions. The shopping center project would make my property the crown jewel of commercial development, and Margaret had positioned herself to cash in on both ends of the deal. The conflict of interest was staggering. As HOA president, she'd been using her position to manipulate property values and pressure homeowners to sell. As a real estate agent, she'd been secretly working with developers who needed exactly the kind of land my family owned. And as an unincorporated entity, her HOA was nothing more than an elaborate fraud designed to legitimize her harassment campaign. "Dad," Tyler said, showing me the final piece of the puzzle, a letter from Mountain Vista Development expressing interest in acquiring the Morrison tract for commercial purposes. This was never about hunting. This was never even about the cabin. She's been planning to steal our land from day one. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the bitter taste of realization. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a con artist running a long-term real estate scam, and my family's legacy was her biggest score. But now that I knew the game she was playing, it was time to change the rules. Time to assemble the cavalry. If Margaret wanted to play hardball, she was about to discover that this blue-collar guy had picked up a few tricks over the years. My kitchen table became War Room Central, and the team that gathered there would have made any general proud. First up, Sarah Chen, my attorney. Turns out she specialized in HOA law and had been waiting her entire career for a case this juicy. "Jake," she said, spreading legal documents across my table like battle plans, "this isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal territory. Collecting money under false pretenses is theft, plain and simple." Tyler took point on documentation, his laptop humming as he organized 4 years' worth of evidence into something that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Mrs. Patterson became our neighborhood intelligence network, her decades of community connections proving invaluable for tracking down other victims of Margaret's schemes. Dave Miller, the guy from the corner house with the non-conforming work truck, brought construction expertise and a working man's understanding of how development really works. But our secret weapon was Maria Santos, a CPA who lived 3 streets over and had the kind of forensic accounting skills that could trace a nickel through a money laundering operation. Maria's analysis of the HOA books, obtained through legal discovery after Sarah filed our lawsuit, was a masterpiece of financial detective work. The smooth feel of bank statements spread across my kitchen table told a story of systematic embezzlement that would have impressed Al Capone. Margaret had been paying herself a management fee with no board authorization. She'd charged consulting expenses to her own companies. She'd even billed the HOA for landscaping her personal property, claiming it was community beautification. The woman had turned neighborhood dues into her personal piggy bank. Knowledge nugget: HOA board members have fiduciary duty to the community. Misusing funds can result in personal liability up to triple damages, plus criminal charges for theft and fraud. But the real goldmine was Tyler's deep dive into county records with Mrs. Patterson playing research assistant. Those two had turned into a formidable team, combining teenage tech skills with institutional memory that went back decades. What they discovered changed everything. My grandfather's original deed included water rights that were worth a fortune in drought-prone Colorado. We're talking about enough water allocation to supply a small town with rights that predated every other claim in the area by 50 years. "Dad," Tyler said, his voice tight with excitement, "Margaret's developers need our water rights to make their shopping center viable. Without them, their project is dead in the water. Literally." The strategic implications hit me like a revelation. I didn't need to fight the development. I needed to control it. Dave's construction background filled in the crucial details. Any major development in our area would require access roads that could only cross my property. Margaret's developers needed my cooperation, whether they knew it yet or not. Sarah laid out our legal strategy with the precision of a chess grandmaster. We file simultaneously on multiple fronts: criminal referral for the theft charges, civil lawsuit for damages and recovery of stolen funds, and injunctive relief to freeze all HOA assets pending investigation. Knowledge nugget: when an HOA operates without proper incorporation, every action they've taken can be reversed, every fine can be voided, and every collected dollar can be recovered with interest. The community building phase started with a simple invitation: neighborhood truth session at the Morrison place. Come see what we're really fighting for. I fired up the old fire pit behind the cabin, put on a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and waited to see who would show up. 32 neighbors came. 32 people ready to hear the truth about Margaret's operation. The sound of gravel under car tires became a symphony of solidarity as story after story emerged. Margaret had been systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Mrs. Patterson presented the historical timeline with the precision of a historian. Maria explained the financial fraud in terms anyone could understand. Sarah laid out everyone's legal rights in plain English, and Tyler, my brilliant tech-savvy son, had created a presentation that would have made any But the real moment came when Dave Miller stood up by the fire, wood smoke curling around his weathered face, and said what everyone was thinking. Margaret picked the wrong neighborhood to mess with. The publicity strategy was Tyler's brainchild. Social media campaign, local news follow-up, complete transparency about Margaret's crimes. "Dad," he said, grinning in the firelight, "the best way to beat a bully is to make sure everyone knows what they're really doing." Margaret's panic was almost palpable. Within days of our community meeting, she was calling neighbors individually, trying to control the narrative, offering settlements, making threats, but the cat was out of the bag, and no amount of damage control could put it back. Her final desperate move was trying to accelerate the shopping center timeline, hoping to cash out before the criminal investigation could destroy her. Too bad for Margaret, we were already 3 moves ahead. Margaret's desperation manifested in ways that would have been comical if they weren't so dangerous. The morning after our community meeting, she showed up at my door at 6 a.m. with a briefcase full of cash. Literally cash. $100 bills, rubber-banded into neat stacks like something out of a mob movie. "Home with $100,000, she said, her perfectly manicured mask slipping to reveal the predator underneath. "Take it and sign a settlement agreement. Everyone walks away happy." I stood there in my work clothes, coffee mug in hand, staring at more money than I'd ever seen in one place. For about 3 seconds, I'll admit it was tempting. Then I remembered Tyler's face when he discovered what she'd been doing to our neighbors. "Margaret," I said, setting my mug down on the porch rail, "you can't buy your way out of theft charges." Her composure cracked like thin ice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Morrison. I have connections. I have resources. I can make your life very, very difficult." And she tried. Oh boy, did she try. The sabotage campaign escalated to levels that would have made a paranoid dictator proud. My water well, the one that had supplied clean water to 3 generations of Morrisons, was suddenly contaminated with diesel fuel. Testing revealed it wasn't accidental runoff. Someone had deliberately poured petroleum products down the well casing. My hunting equipment started disappearing from the locked barn. Rifle scope, calls, even my grandfather's vintage hunting knife that had been in the family for 60 years. Each theft was small enough to avoid major police attention, but significant enough to make the message clear. Margaret could reach me anywhere, anytime. Tyler's security cameras captured some interesting nighttime visitors, specifically Margaret's landscaping crew conducting what they probably thought were covert operations. The crunch of footsteps outside my cabin at 2 a.m. became a regular soundtrack, like having your own personal stalking orchestra. But Margaret's real mistake was bringing politics into it. She'd been cultivating relationships with city council members for years, and now she was cashing in those chips. Suddenly, I was facing a parade of safety inspections that would have made a Soviet bureaucrat blush. The building inspector who showed up to examine my 70-year-old cabin acted like he was investigating a nuclear waste site. Every board, every nail, every inch of wiring got scrutinized with the kind of attention usually reserved for space shuttle components. The cabin that had weathered decades of Colorado winters was suddenly a public safety hazard requiring immediate remediation. Code enforcement became Margaret's personal harassment tool. Parking violations for my truck being 6 inches over the property line. Noise ordinance violations for using my chainsaw at 11 a.m. on a Saturday. Even a citation for improper storage of firewood because my woodpile wasn't aesthetically consistent with community standards. The smell of fierce sweat became Margaret's new perfume whenever we crossed paths. Her usual confidence was cracking under the pressure of multiple investigations, and she was making increasingly desperate moves to discredit me before the whole thing collapsed. Her smear campaign went digital with a vengeance. Anonymous social media accounts started spreading rumors about my dangerous past and threats against families. Fake reviews appeared on my employer's website claiming I was unstable and shouldn't be trusted with heavy machinery. She even tried to get me fired by calling my supervisor with stories about my erratic behavior and potential violence. The whisper campaign at PTA meetings, grocery stores, and church services painted me as some kind of unhinged mountain man terrorizing suburban families. Margaret's talent for manipulation was impressive. She could make herself the victim in any situation, no matter how overwhelming the evidence against her. But Tyler's digital forensic skills were paying dividends. That kid had become a one-man CSI unit, recovering deleted emails from Margaret's real estate website and tracking the IP addresses of those anonymous social media accounts back to her home office. The private investigator I hired, a former Denver cop named Rodriguez, documented Margaret's bribery attempt with audio and video that would make any prosecutor smile. Turns out, offering cash to make criminal charges go away is its own crime. And Margaret had just added obstruction of justice to her growing list of legal problems. Meanwhile, my allies were facing their own pressure campaigns. Mrs. Patterson started getting threatening phone calls about accidents that happen to elderly residents who don't mind their own business. Dave Miller's contractor license was suddenly under review by the state board. Maria faced an IRS audit that coincidentally involved an agent who happened to be Margaret's real estate friend's brother-in-law. The pattern was clear. Margaret wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was waging war against anyone who dared to challenge her authority. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd united the entire neighborhood against her. Any twist. Margaret's escalation had exposed her network of corruption throughout local government, giving us evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond HOA fraud. Margaret's final, desperate gambit was a masterclass in manipulation and political theater. She called an emergency HOA meeting, her last chance to control the narrative before everything came crashing down. The invitation was hand-delivered to every house in Meadowbrook Estates, complete with dramatic language about addressing the crisis, threatening our community. Her opening presentation was pure propaganda, delivered with the polish of someone who'd clearly practiced in front of a mirror. PowerPoint slides full of statistics about property value declines, photographs of my property taken with telephoto lenses to make everything look as rundown as possible, and testimonials from concerned families who feared for their children's safety. But the cracks in Margaret's usual perfect appearance were impossible to hide. Her hair was slightly mussed, her makeup heavier than usual to cover the stress lines, and that artificial smile couldn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She looked like someone holding on to control by her perfectly manicured fingernails. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, gesturing dramatically at a blown-up photo of my hunting cabin, "we cannot allow one individual's selfish agenda to destroy the community we've all worked so hard to build." Her narrative painted me as mentally unstable, a dangerous relic from the past who was too stubborn to adapt to modern community standards. She produced letters of support from city officials, the same ones she'd been cultivating for years, and implied that my resistance to reasonable regulations was somehow unpatriotic. That's when she made her biggest mistake. In her desperation to discredit me, Margaret started making specific accusations about my threatening behavior and acts of intimidation against neighbors. The problem? Tyler had been documenting every interaction for months, and her claims were provably false. The moment Margaret finished her presentation, the mood in the room shifted like a thunderstorm rolling in. Mrs. Patterson, sweet, elderly Mrs. Patterson, who'd never raised her voice in 70 years, stood up from her folding chair with the dignity of someone who'd finally had enough. "Margaret," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room, "I've lived in this neighborhood longer than anyone here, and I've never seen anything as dishonest as what you just presented." What followed was testimony that dismantled Margaret's credibility piece by piece. Mrs. Patterson described the pressure tactics, the attempted property purchases, the threats about accidents happening to elderly residents who didn't cooperate. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she read from notes she'd been keeping for months, but her voice never wavered. Dave Miller was next, standing up with the quiet confidence of someone who works with his hands for a living. "Margaret offered me $50,000 to lie about Jake in court," he announced, his words falling into the room like stones into still water. "When I refused, she threatened to have my contractor's license revoked." The dominoes started falling faster than Margaret could stop them. Family after family stood up to share their own stories of harassment, financial pressure, and intimidation. The community she'd thought she controlled was turning against her in real time. But Margaret wasn't finished. In a move that proved just how disconnected from reality she'd become, she doubled down on her accusations. She claimed the testimonies were coordinated lies from conspirators trying to destroy legitimate community governance. That's when Tyler made his move. My brilliant, tech-savvy son had been quietly setting up his laptop in the back of the room, and now he was ready to present evidence that would end Margaret's reign of terror once and for all. The deleted emails appeared on the projection screen in all their incriminating glory. Margaret's own words, recovered from her real estate website's server, laid out her entire scheme in black and white. The room watched in stunned silence as email after email revealed her plans to eliminate the hunting problem, acquire property through pressure tactics, and profit from forced sales to developers. The smoking gun was an email thread with Mountain Vista development that included detailed financial projections. Margaret's cut from forcing my family off our land? $3,200,000, 0 cents. Her role wasn't just facilitating the shopping center development. She was a full partner in the scheme. Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. "This is all fake," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "They hacked my computer. They're trying to frame me." But the evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in that room could see it. The woman who presented herself as a guardian of community values was exposed as nothing more than a con artist, running an elaborate real estate scam. Mini twist. The emergency meeting Margaret called to destroy Jake's credibility became the public forum where her own crimes were exposed to the entire community, with law enforcement already on the way based on Tyler's evidence. The sound of sirens in the distance wasn't coincidence. Detective Rodriguez had been listening from the parking lot, waiting for exactly this moment. The Meadowbrook Community Center had never seen anything like what happened next. What started as Margaret's last-ditch effort to control the narrative turned into the most dramatic public downfall in our county's recent memory, and Channel 7 was there to broadcast every excruciating moment live. Detective Rodriguez entered through the back doors just as Margaret was screaming about conspiracy and fake evidence. The metallic click of his badge against the doorframe cut through her protests like a knife through butter. Behind him came two more officers and a very official-looking woman from the district attorney's office who'd been building a case against Margaret for weeks. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that institutional carpeting as Rodriguez walked down the center aisle, warrant in hand, camera crews tracking his every step. "Margaret Whitmore," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of months of investigation. "You're under arrest for fraud, theft, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Margaret's face went through about 6 different shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that would have made a chameleon jealous. Her perfectly constructed facade crumbled in real time as the handcuffs came out. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "You're all sheep. You don't know what you're doing." But the community she'd terrorized for years wasn't buying it anymore. As Rodriguez read her rights, a spontaneous standing ovation erupted from the crowd. 47 families who'd been living under Margaret's thumb were finally watching justice served with a side of very public humiliation. Tyler was filming everything on his phone, but he didn't need to. Channel 7's cameras were capturing every moment for the evening news. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Martinez, was already crafting the sound bites that would make this story go viral by morning. But the real mic drop moment came when Sarah Chen stepped forward with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The civil lawsuit we'd filed was just the beginning. Inside that folder were criminal referrals, federal charges for mail fraud, and enough evidence to put Margaret away for years. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah announced to the room, her lawyer voice cutting through the chaos, "has systematically defrauded this community of over $200,000, 0 cents, in illegal dues, used her position to pressure families into selling their homes, and conspired with developers to profit from forced property sales." She held up a document that made Margaret's already pale face go completely white. This morning, federal agents seized all assets related to her real estate firm. Every penny she stole will be returned to the community with interest. The perp walk was something to behold. Margaret, who'd spent years walking through the neighborhood like she owned it, was now being escorted out in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. Her designer heels clicked against the linoleum floor with the rhythm of a death march. And that expensive quilted vest looked pretty ridiculous with silver bracelets decorating her wrists. The media circus outside was intense. Jessica Martinez thrust a microphone toward Margaret as she was loaded into the police car, asking pointed questions about the fraud scheme and victim families. Margaret's only response was to hide her face and mutter something about getting the best lawyers money can buy. Tyler grabbed the mic opportunity like the social media savvy teenager he was. "My dad taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies," he told the camera, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. "Margaret thought she could steal our family's land and get away with it. She was wrong." My own interview was shorter but more pointed. "This was never about hunting regulations or property values," I said, looking straight into the camera. "This was about one woman's greed and her willingness to destroy a community to feed it." The crowd started chanting, I kid you not, "Justice for Jake," like this was some kind of sporting event. Mrs. Patterson was crying happy tears, Dave Miller was shaking hands with everyone in reach, and Maria Santos was already talking about forming a legitimate community association with actual transparency and accountability. But the moment that really got me was when Tyler put his arm around my shoulders as we watched Margaret's police car disappear down the street. "Dad," he said, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, "Grandpa would be so proud." The evening news led with our story. A local woman arrested in multi-million-dollar HOA fraud scheme. By morning, we were trending on social media with hashtags like hashtag HAOA/Jake. The video of Margaret's meltdown and arrest had been viewed over 1 million times. Margaret Whitmore's reign of terror was over. Her empire of lies had crumbled in the most public way possible. And the best part? We'd done it all completely legally, using nothing but the truth and Margaret's own greed against her. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting a bully destroy herself. 6 months later, Margaret's house sold at auction for about half what she'd paid for it. Turns out nobody wanted to buy property from a convicted felon facing 2 years of probation, $100,000, 0 cents in fines, and enough community service hours to keep her busy until she qualified for Social Security. Her real estate license? Permanently revoked. Her developer connections? Mysteriously unavailable for comment. The best part? She slunk back to California with her tail between her legs, probably warning everyone she met about crazy mountain people who don't appreciate good governance. Meanwhile, Meadowbrook Estates was healing faster than anyone expected. Mrs. Patterson got elected as the first president of our properly incorporated HOA. Turns out when you actually file the paperwork correctly and follow the law, amazing things happen. Property values didn't just stabilize, they went up 15%, thanks to what the real estate agents started calling positive community spirit. Knowledge nugget: communities with transparent, legally compliant HOAs actually have higher property values than those run by petty tyrants. Buyers pay premium prices for functional neighborhoods. Dave Miller's construction company ended up getting hired for legitimate community improvements, new playground equipment, proper storm drainage, and a walking trail that connects all the neighborhoods. Funny how much you can accomplish when you're not spending all your time fighting corruption. My relationship with Tyler reached levels I'd never imagined possible. That kid had gone from weekend visitor to full partner in managing our family legacy. He'd learned more about standing up for what's right in 6 months than most people learn in a lifetime. Plus, his documentation skills earned him a scholarship to Colorado State's journalism program. Apparently, exposing real estate fraud looks great on college applications. The land development situation worked out better than I could have dreamed. Mountain Vista Development approached me directly after Margaret's arrest, offering a fair market deal for development rights. But instead of just selling out, we negotiated something unprecedented: limited commercial development that preserved the hunting land and created a community benefit. The Morrison Family Conservation Fund became the crown jewel of our settlement. Half the development profits went into a trust that provides hunting safety courses for local youth, environmental education programs, and scholarships for rural students pursuing conservation careers. Tyler's Eagle Scout project, building an educational trail through the preserve, became the model for similar programs across the state. The old cabin got restored to its former glory and designated as a historical landmark. Now it serves as a living museum where 3 generations of Morrison hunting photos hang alongside new pictures of Tyler and me carrying on the tradition. The smell of wood smoke from that old stone chimney still mixes with the crisp scent of autumn leaves, just like it did when Grandpa was teaching me to track deer through these same woods. Our annual Morrison Family Hunting Heritage Festival draws families from across Colorado. Kids learn archery, where I learned from my grandfather, while their parents swap stories about standing up to neighborhood bullies. It's become the kind of community event that Margaret's fake harmony could never have created. The ripple effects went way beyond our little neighborhood. Tyler's documentation methods became a template used by homeowner advocates across the country. Mrs. Patterson's activism helped push through state legislation requiring stronger financial oversight of HOA boards. The Channel 7 investigation sparked a statewide audit that uncovered similar fraud schemes in dozens of communities. I even got offered a book deal, Fighting Back: How I Beat the HOA Bully. Turns out there are a lot of people out there dealing with Margaret-style tyrants, and my story gave them hope that resistance is possible. But the moment that really summed everything up happened last Sunday evening. Tyler and I were sitting on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, when he looked over at me and said, "Dad, Grandpa would be proud of what we built here. And you know what? He was right. We'd taken Margaret's attempt to destroy our family legacy and turned it into something bigger and better than any of us had imagined. The sign at the entrance to our property says it all: Morrison Heritage Land, Hunting and Community Welcome. Right below it, Tyler added a smaller sign that reads, "In memory of bullies everywhere, they always lose in the end." So here's my message to all of you dealing with HOA nightmares. Document everything, know your rights, and never let petty tyrants convince you that their corruption is normal. And remember, sometimes the best way to win isn't just beating the bully. It's building something so good that everyone else wins too. If you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. We're not alone in this fight. And if this story helped you understand your rights or gave you hope for your own situation, smash that subscribe button. Because bullies count on good people staying silent, and we're just getting started.